Hello, my darling cauldron stirrers and paradigm pirates. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I have spoken a lot on my channel over time about cycle breaking, the magic of doing it, the difficulty of doing it, what it feels like to break out of a cycle, go in a different direction. It's a big part of what I think makes me who I am, and it's something I feel I've certainly done. And today I want to talk a little bit about how I feel about cycle breaking, some of the techniques I used in doing it for myself, and some stuff about my past that I think it would be useful for you to know in the context of this and whatnot. So as usual now with my videos, timestamps are down below. I'm so glad that that was made into a thing that is much easier to do and to present to you, because obviously I do make quite long videos. Every so often someone comes along and says, Kellyanne, you need to shorten your videos. I cannot watch your videos. They're too long. And you say something that could be said in 10 minutes in 45, and honestly, that's just how I roll when it comes to making videos. That's how I enjoy it. That's how I feel it's done best. So I guess use the timestamps down below. And if you don't want to listen to everything I have to say, it's all there cut up for you like a enjoyable little conversational cake. So you can go right ahead. Apparently that's one cycle I won't be breaking. I won't be breaking the cycle of making long videos. Not today. No way, no how. Honey bunnies, once a month I do have one of my videos sponsored by the lovely Skillshare. I'm very, very excited to let you know that this video is sponsored by Skillshare, and I will be talking about one of their amazing and very relevant courses later in the video, so it'll be good to let you know about that. There are lots of different types of cycle breakers. Cycles are broken on a daily basis in every different area of life that you can imagine. There are social cycles that are broken. There are professional cycles that are broken. So we're talking about whistleblowers, for example, are cycle breakers. They are breaking a culture of professional silencing or oppression or deceit or fraud, and they're making it known, and they're trying to change something. They're trying to literally shake up the structure at its foundations. When systematic abuses of power occur within systems, you know, a cycle breaker is someone who will come along and try and bring that to the fore, bring that to the attention of the public, bring that to the attention of whoever it needs to be brought to have that changed. Behaviours within culture, behaviours within religious communities, the way that the media operates, the messages that we are being given. In all of these different areas, a cycle breaker would be somebody who goes against the grain, goes against the teachings, goes against what they're being told to conform to and expected to conform to, and actually tries to blaze a new trail, tries to for themselves and others potentially really recognize that there is a different way, there is a better way of going. And cycle breakers often put things out on the table. You know, they ask for an uncomfortable conversation to be had in some way, and certainly they are change makers, and that can make them very inconvenient characters in the story for people who want to rely on the system. They benefit from the system, whatever system it is, political, as I said, cultural, professional, wherever it exists. So cycle breaking can be lonely, it can be scary, it can be misunderstood. There are lots of beautiful cycle breaking movements that I love to see, movements around our mindset and around what the media teaches us to ingest and believe about beauty standards, about weight. So that's always just really beautiful to see. One form of cycle breaking that I see a lot in my line of work and that I talk about, I have the great privilege of talking about with loads of people, is obviously generational familial cycle breaking. So, you know, X many amount of generations in your family have always done things a certain way or believed a certain thing or taught a certain thing. And then, you know, this person comes to a point where they decide, I don't want to carry on with that. And I don't also potentially want to deliver that to my children and have them continue the cycle. So I'm going to break it, you know. And with the kind of work that I do with spiritual mentoring and giving tarot readings and stuff, I meet a lot of cycle breakers. And it certainly is a very infectious energy, and it fills my heart up, and I love it. I love having these conversations, and it's really moved me over the years to hear from people about how they're breaking cycles and how they identified cycles and what they want to do differently, and sometimes also, yes, how they want to parent differently, which is you know, it's such a gift to be able to have these kinds of conversations. It never gets old and it never gets boring. It's always really inspiring. There are all kinds of cycles that can be broken, even if they've been going on for lifetimes. Cycles of abuse, cycles of poverty, shame, silence, violence, you know, willful ignorance, abuses of power, ignoring things that are going on that need to be talked about, There are cycles of archetypes, I think, within family dynamics, especially, that really just run through generations. We see always in a generation of a family this certain, a scapegoat archetype, for example, or enabling dynamics in families, or, the golden child and the black sheep. And these things almost sort of echo. And it's amazing when you talk to people, talk to people in your life about things that they've noticed that have repeated themselves, that they notice that they are continuing a cycle that they know that a parent went through or a parent's parent went through. And I think that's really interesting to see. And there have been studies done on these things as well. I remember one study that I read said that male children who see violence against their mothers at the hands of their fathers are 3 times more likely to grow up to exact some kind of abuse on their female partner. I've also read a study that said that you're 4-fold more likely to fall into alcoholism if you were raised by an alcoholic parent, And I think, I know that these things probably for a lot of people are kind of like common sense, that you be what you see, and you learn those patterns, those bad coping mechanisms, those behaviors, they're normalized, and they become the way that you learn how to cope or express yourself or whatever. But, I think at the same time, sometimes it's harder to see it within yourself, or to really admit to yourself that you've got that work to do, or that you are falling into a pattern that was so harmful for you, and perhaps exacting it on somebody else at times too. So I've done some of this work myself of breaking cycles for sure, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that have really helped me in that regard. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about my mother. I want to, without violating her privacy and without going into her story, because I think that's a really important part of what I do with my sort of like public work, is making sure that people's privacy is guarded. And that can sometimes be a difficult line to walk, and it's a difficult road to kind of build as I go, because obviously a lot of the stories you have about your life are interwoven with the stories of others, and you have to be able to speak about your life. You just have to, but you've got to figure out where the parameters are for making sure other people's privacy is guarded, and you're not telling a story that's actually somebody else's story to tell. Having said all of that, I want to talk a little bit about how my experiences of witnessing cycle breaking were instrumental in terms of my own journey and the ability that I think I had to break cycles. And I want to talk about these experiences for a purpose. It's not just to talk about my story, it's to make a point as well for those of you who are in the midst of trying to break cycles. If you are trying to break cycles in your parenting so that it's different from the parenting that you received, if you're trying to break cycles in terms of mindset, that you picked up certain things as you were going through childhood and you're trying now to like break away from that stuff. Maybe you're trying to set boundaries that you were always taught that it was not okay for you to set, and you're really trying to do that now. I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about my experience of witnessing cycle breaking, messy first generation cycle breaking, so I can kind of explain to you a little bit how worthy you are of commending yourself for the work that you're doing, even though it's hard, even though it's messy, even though sometimes it feels glacial. I want to really sort of give you the opportunity today, if possible, to commend yourself for the work that you're doing. It's really important. It's really vital work, whether you're a parent or not, whether you're ever going to have children or not, doesn't matter. Cycle breaking is always sacred. Cycle breaking is holy stuff. When I look back over my life, I can see that my mum was already breaking cycles, even from the point that I was born. I'm her eldest child. I know she was breaking cycles, but she wasn't doing so in a conscious way. It was obviously just this very heart-centered drive to not repeat certain things, and to try to give me a different experience. And I do think part of this is nature, that in some ways, she naturally isn't inclined towards the behaviours that she witnessed and towards the things that she went through. She's naturally not inclined to create that kind of environment. But I also think it's wholly possible for people who are not naturally inclined to be abusive or to be dismissive or to be cruel to do so on the basis of nurture, on the basis of what they saw. And I think it's true that people can, for example, exhibit violence or be abusive or be very cruel on a repeated basis, and then really not understand why on earth they're doing that. Like, why are they doing that? And it's very frustrating for them because they don't feel that it's in line with who they are in their soul. you know. It definitely, when I look at my upbringing, there was this turning point though, where my mum went from being she went from exhibiting cycle breaking tendencies, if you will, so wanting something different, to actually acknowledging that what she experienced was so horrific and so unacceptable, and therefore becoming a conscious cycle breaker. In other words, she started to recognize and name the work that she was doing. She never called herself a cycle breaker, but she basically, when I was a teenager, went through a very messy, very painful divorce, and also lost her mother. And at that time, something alchemized inside this woman. And things started to change in a very, very deep, very paradigm shifting, paradigm bending way for this woman who was raising me. My family life changed really so much because of my stepfather moving out. The dynamic was completely different. The vibe was totally different. There was a lot going on in my life and in the lives of my siblings as well. Lots of tumultuous energy, lots of pain, lots of mistrust, lots of pieces to be picked up. And my mother was also going through this big change and like coming to this incredible consciousness in this way that she had never seen before. So that's why I refer to my mum as a first generation cycle breaker, meaning she had no blueprint. She had no example. She had no master to follow. This is just new. This is new right out of the gate. So let's say, for example, I had a daughter and, she grew up and she was very much a cycle breaker. She was breaking like any family cycles that I may have passed on to her. She's breaking cultural cycles. She's really sort of like looking at these things that she's being encouraged to do or conform to, or that she feels she's got to do. And she is sort of like trying to consciously go in another direction. You could say that she had a blueprint for that, in the sense that I talk about it and I sort of lionize that cycle breaking sort of instinct, and I've done it myself, so even though of course I would always give her credit for that sacred work, there's someone that she took some examples from. There would be if I was to have a daughter, which I won't, but there would be. For my mom, it was not that way. This is something just so different to the paradigm that she was raised in that I cannot describe to you, and I won't describe to you without betraying her privacy or anybody else's. But it's kind of mind-bending when I think about it. It is kind of mind-bending. I want to say that witnessing this was highly influential, but it was also very difficult for me. So before she went through what I consider to be, and what I remember as her period of change, we had a quite a difficult relationship in a lot of ways. Also a good relationship in some ways, I will say, but there was a lot of mistrust there. I was going through a lot of things I was not sharing with my mother. I was going through a lot of difficulties that she wasn't aware of. There was so much tumultuous energy and difficulty and pain in the home. Like I really, it's not all my story, so I can't sort of explain things in a way that I would feel comfortable with on the channel. But look, if you want to know more about my own story with mental health issues, I have sort of told that story. So I'll leave a video down below to a previous Self-Love September video that I did about my mental health journey, things I went through. You can watch that if you're curious and see my blue hair of old. But I think before the change, it was a difficult, fraught connection with lots of, I think, questions unanswered on both sides for each of us about who the other one was. I think my mum would say that's fair. And this sort of man that she'd married, I very, very consciously did not get along with him, and I didn't feel safe in his presence, and I was not happy to have him in the home. And so there was also that extra barrier, as you can imagine. So witnessing the change was highly influential. And I've spoken in a previous video before about how my mum is the reason I got into the works of Carl Jung, because when my stepfather moved out and she started going to therapy after her mum died, she started realizing, like, I've got a lot of stuff from the past, a lot of stuff in my family history that I need to get a grip on and I need to deal with. So she started going to therapy, and of course you can imagine that had an alchemical effect on me. But also when you're a cycle breaker and you have no blueprint, no template, you know, you've never done anything like this before, you just feel this deep fucking instinct that you've got to do some work, that you can't keep carrying on with these patterns that are hurting you, hurting people around you, that you've got bad memories that you've repressed for years and you need to deal with them. That is much more of an art than it is a science. And when you have no master to learn your art from, it is a very fraught, very fractious, very sometimes scary art. And I saw my mother doing this while I was a teenager. So it was difficult. You know, it's not a straight line, cycle breaking. Sometimes you do take two steps, you take a step forward and two steps back. Sometimes you lose your way. You don't feel like you have what you need, the resources or the encouragement or the self-belief to do the things that you're trying to do. And you know, going through the therapeutic work that she was going through, which was very deep, and I'll always commend my mum for doing that work. There was also that too. She's now trying to parent us as a single parent while doing all of this work on herself and dredging up very difficult memories and very difficult psychic content. So, you know, I will say that it's not. It wasn't a bowl of cherries for her or me. If you're struggling to break a cycle right now, whether it's familial or not, honor yourself for that. Commend yourself for that, even if it's messy and even if the road is very tough sometimes. And even if sometimes you lose your way, you lose the map, or you don't believe that you can really come to some different way of being. And I know that I talk a lot about generational cycles, about cycles that you learn from your parents, who learned it from their parents, or whatever the case may be. But certainly there are lots of cycles that people are consciously attempting to break right now that they don't really have an answer for in terms of what the origin is for that cycle. It's just something that they picked up, that they either needed at a certain point in their life, that was a survival tactic, but now it isn't useful, you know, or that they really just sort of, they don't understand why they do the thing that they keep doing, but they need to break the cycle. Maybe they have an addictive cycle that they don't really understand what the origin story for that is. But at the end of the day, it's a cycle. It's something you kept going back to. It's something you kept repeating, and you're trying to break that. You're trying to do something different. Yes, it's messy, especially if you have no master, you know, especially if you're doing it with no blueprint. There are no footsteps to follow, you know, to follow along and put your own feet into those holes. It's just you know. And I want to say for the record that even though I don't believe that every cycle can just be broken clean in a generation, and I don't believe that the work is easy or neat or a straight line, I will always be grateful to my mother for doing that work, always. And yes, you know, my upbringing could have been a lot better in many ways, but it could have been a lot worse. When I think about some of the things that my mum's experienced, not only in her family home, but later on with other things as well that she went through, I know that those things wouldn't have justified her being a far more problematic parent than she was, but those things would have explained it. And yet something within was, she sheltered the part of her that wanted to do something differently. The little flame, that little vulnerable flame out in the fucking storm, somehow she managed to put her body around it and just keep it going, give it kindling. I will say that my mum does downplay this work. Sometimes when I talk to her about it, you know, she downplays it and sort of shrugs it off and, you know, says I could have done a lot better, or I should have started the work a lot sooner, or you know, whatever. But like, I just won't let her do that. Like, she's got to have her moment. I need to make her have her moment sometimes, you know. I believe my father is a cycle breaker too, for sure. I definitely saw evidence of that throughout my time knowing him and having him in my life, but nowhere near enough to be able to continue the relationship in a way that was healthy, unfortunately. It's not that he had access to less tools necessarily than my mum. I think there's lots of dysfunction on both sides of my family, but it was the fear of picking those tools up, the fear of using them, I think. And I want to talk so much more about that, but I want to really explain why I think those fears came in and what, you know, how that affected me. But I really just want to be conscious of privacy. But yeah, I think that both of my parents have strong rebel archetypes, which I definitely inherited, and certainly showed cycle breaking capacity for absolute sure. from young, in fact. And I think they suffered for that. But I think I also suffered, you know, from them not being able to break cycles and exposing me to cycles. And I think what I saw in my mum was this almost like sacredly ferocious desire to stop that suffering, to stop it. And it's I knew I was going to get emotional, but that's okay, because it's not bad. It's not a bad thing, and I'm not going to cut it out. But yeah, I think that has had a deep influence on me. I am grateful for that. And I think if you're trying to break a cycle and it's messy and you're disappointed that it's not done yet, that the work is not done yet, or you're disappointed with how that work is going, or you're standing right on the barrier, you know, 3 of 1 style, and you're wanting to step over and it's really hard. I just want you to know that, like, the work that you are doing or that you're about to approach is work that has had probably the most profound impact on my life. And I often think about, you know, my clients I've spoken to. I remember like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the conversations I've had, by the way. If we've ever talked even for just one session, one reading, whatever, the likelihood is that I remember something that you said or something about your journey. I see 4 clients a day on an average full-time day doing my job. And, you know, I have about 90 client appointments a week, 90 a month. So about 20 to 25 a week. And it sort of tots up to about 90 here or there, give or take. And I always think of that as like, I have 4 teachers a day. I have 4 classes a day. How privileged am I to have all of this education? And, you know, that there's so much cycle breaking energy that I come across and that I unpack with people and we just talk about. I know I'm not a therapist. It's not my intention to be a therapist. And I speak with a lot of people who do have therapists, you know, and I speak with a lot of people who also are very distrustful of mainstream therapy and are very sort of concerned about previous experiences they've had for all kinds of reasons. And I want them to understand that I'm not a therapist, but I do respect their decision to seek medicine out in the way that feels right for them, as long as they understand my limitations and I understand my limitations. And I think that's really important. It's just talks. It's just space holding. That's all it is. And I try to be really mindful of that. You know, so I just want to say that I continue to be very deeply inspired by cycle breaking and holding space for people who are channeling that cycle breaking instinct. It is a blessing that keeps bringing me back to my own sense of what might need to change, and also my sense of what did change for me inside my mother and then on to me as well. I saw another world, you know. I saw another world. It's like my mom was looking through the window at this other world in the sky and marveling at it. And I was kind of like behind her, looking over her shoulder, being like, oh, okay, that's different. That's new. Why is mom staring out the window like that? She's never done this before. And then seeing this other like planet and suddenly realizing that like I could go there too. I've broken some cycles in my time, baby cakes. You know, I've definitely taken that example and kind of run with it for sure. I've been very interested, actually. I've just thought of this now. It's like a random thought that's just come to me. I've always been very interested in revolution and social change and movements for social progress and justice. And I've really done a lot of reading about certain things like that. You know, I was really, really obsessed with the Russian Revolution when I was growing up. This is not a conversation about my politics or anything like that, or what I think of Lenin or whatever. But like, I definitely, you know, had some massive interest in that kind of thing. And I've had huge interest in like social change and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's also something that is just a part of my personality, to always be interested in paradigm breaking realizing that something is not working for enough people, or it's really harming some people or whatever, and changing it. For me, I've walked away from abusive and unhealthy connections, and that's only when they couldn't be salvaged. I've done a lot of work to salvage, and I will say that I'm not about walking away straight away, but if salvaging through changed behavior on my part and through instating boundaries and stuff could not occur, then walking away, certainly. I have stopped my abusive relationship with myself. I've broken a cycle of self-harm that went on for 7 years. On a fairly frequent basis. My arms are covered in scars, and I've got scars other places on my body, on my hands and inside my thighs and stuff like that from self-harm. I have broken I've broken a cycle of disordered eating. I've broken a cycle of smoking, quite heavy smoking for a few years back there, for definite. People pleasing and overgiving have been cycles that I've looked at and recognized and sought to change, for sure. And the people pleasing thing comes from a very, very long it's a long cycle. It started with a parental relationship and went on into other things. So I want to talk a little bit about my glacial and frustrating process. That's what a lot of it was, definitely. And I want to talk about just different things that have helped me, for sure. But first, I have to go and speak to one of my clients, one of my teachers for the day. So I'm going to stop this video now, and sorry about the lighting change when I come back. Honey bunnies, let me take a moment to talk to you about Skillshare now. It's an incredible online learning platform, and I'm so proud to have Skillshare as a sponsor. I get so much from having a Skillshare account. There's so many awesome courses about lifestyle and creativity and all that good stuff. I want to talk to you about a course today by Shadira Egaru. She is an activist and a best-selling author. She's commonly known online as the Slum Flower. I'm sure some of you have already heard of her. I watched a course recently by her called Revolutionary Self-Care. It really talks about a lot of different things: nurturing yourself, turning up the volume on your authenticity, learning how self-doubt works and how to deal with it. And also she talks about having hard conversations with your friends and family about the things that matter to you and the boundaries that you want to hold. So there really is a lot there for anyone that would be watching a video like this, I think. If you're one of the first 1,000 people to click the link down below in my description bar, then you will be given a free 1-month trial of premium Skillshare. Definitely worth checking out, definitely worth doing, and of course it helps me when you click my link. So I'll leave that down below. It is a very affordable platform, but of course you want to have that free month for sure to try it out. One thing I realized in my own journey of breaking cycles and really making big paradigm bending change in my life is that you have to be really taking it seriously, because sometimes other people won't. And I'm not saying, the whole world's going to be out to get you and no one's going to understand you and everybody's going to ridicule you. But you do have to remember, as Adam Ant once famously said and sang, ridicule is nothing to be scared of. That's got to be a thing. When you decide that you're going to break a cycle, you have to recognize some people are going to rile against that. They're either going to laugh at it, it's going to make them uncomfortable because it's going to make them address the work that they might need to do. If you want to let go of a substance that you have an addiction to, then you might find that people around you are uncomfortable with those changes that you're trying to make for yourself. If you want to, change something in the parenting of your children and, maybe your parents or family members don't agree with that, or it makes them feel uncomfortable or weirded out, they will ridicule you for that. And they'll be like, oh, don't be silly, and they will try to push that boundary, cross that line, not listen to what you're saying. And I think one of the hardest times to take your own convictions seriously is when somebody else is not taking it seriously and demeaning it or downplaying it or trying to act as though it's weird or it's silly or it's not acceptable. That's going to be one of the hardest times for a lot of people, where, holding on to your own conviction and saying, no, I'm committed to my conviction. I will not do this. I will not go this way. This will not happen. This is my boundary. That can be one of the hardest times, for sure, depending on who you are and what you've gone through. But it's certainly difficult sometimes to feel as though you're being reprimanded or mocked or rejected or alienated or whatever for trying to hold that strong boundary. So that's one thing that I think made it useful for me to have a spiritual practice. And I would say that this is true for a lot of things in my life. Having the time every morning and sometimes in the evening as well to just be at my altar, do my thing, write my statements of intention or do some cauldron work, burn some stuff, do a devotional, whatever it might be. For me, it changes every single morning. Doing that really just helps me to have a moment with myself where I center on what is most important to me. And whenever I've been trying to break a cycle, whatever it's about, however long it's been going on for, I know that I I revisit my conviction every time I do sacred work like that. Every time, you know, it brings me home to what is really most important within myself. It doesn't make me a perfect human being. It doesn't mean that I always have all the answers, but it definitely does give me that sense that I've locked into what I need. I've checked in with what I know I'm doing and where I am on my journey. And that makes it much more difficult for anybody else's opinions or attitudes to knock me off my perch. If you don't have a regular practice right now, you don't want a regular practice right now, you're really not sure what you're doing with spirituality right now, I would recommend instead just having your convictions in a place that you can see them and read them or think about them every single day. You know, having them written on the wall, on your bathroom mirror, in your planner, as your phone screensaver. You know, it's always about making sure that you are reinforcing that message for yourself, and you don't have to do it the way I do it or the way anybody else does it, but I would strongly recommend that you do it. There's just so much shit going on every single day. There's so many different things we're dealing with. There's so much different news stories and situations and dramas and whatnot happening that we're trying to contend with. It can be really easy for even some of our strongest convictions and our strongest desires to float to the bottom and be discarded or be, you know, really not noticed for a while. So that's why I don't think there's any shame at all in having almost like very regular reminders for yourself that you kind of set up in advance that remind you of what is important to you. I think when it comes to people not thinking that your cycle breaking journey is important, not thinking it's worthy or thinking it's silly or questioning it all the time or discouraging you with it, you have to really start to think of your cycle breaking as a form of survival. That might sound dramatic for where you are with things. I get that. It might be the wrong word for you. But for me, I mean, for you, it might be like flourishing or something like that. Like, you know that you cannot flourish until you break that cycle. For me, some of the cycles that I was dealing with and the things I had to change, it was about survival, purely and simply. You know, it really was about knowing that I couldn't be here anymore and I couldn't carry on anymore unless I found another way and stopped some of the patterns that I was experiencing. I did a video a little while ago about boundaries that I keep for myself in relationships. And one of the boundaries that I talked about in that video was I discussed the importance of not letting anybody mock the things that I do that give me joy or help me through life, you know? So anything that I feel like I might want to do, anything like silly or apparently childish from an outside perspective, I don't want people in my inner sanctum who are going to mock that or be embarrassed about that or make me feel bad for that, you know. And the same with my spirituality. I think it's really important that I do what I have to do to survive. You know, there are some people that look at my kind of spiritual path, or maybe, you know, any spiritual path, if they're just really dead set against all religious expression, and they'll just be like, this is just a fucking delusion. This is a load of silliness. This means nothing. This is ridiculous. I've got secondhand embarrassment for you that you believe all this shit. And I've had that said to me online, and I've read, you know, that people believe these things. I know people believe these things and are very disparaging. But you know what? I cannot allow myself to make that into my work. And I know that I would be a very different person, and not for the better, if I did not let myself express spiritually what is within me to express. And so when it comes down to the wire with things like this, I just look at whatever I'm doing that makes me feel better. And I think to myself, I was in pain, really, really bad pain for a long, long time. And this is one of the things that makes me able to deal with my pain. It's numbed my pain. It's given me solace when I felt like I had none. It's given me a sense of purpose when I felt like I had none. How can that be so bad? And who is anybody else to judge what I do with my practice, with my creativity, with my free time? You know, anything that gives me comfort and makes me feel like a place of safety in the world or a place of inspiration in the world, I'm not going to let anyone take that from me. And I think the same is true when it comes to cycle breaking. If I've decided that it is a point of survival for me to do whatever it is I'm doing, then somebody can rile against it all they want. But if it's a point of survival, then that's what it is. It's really about my well-being and knowing that I've been in such a low place before in my life. I have a responsibility to my own well-being. I am the parent of myself. And when I've had to walk away from connections, when I've had to, you know, stop cycles that existed in relationships where I needed to put boundaries down and I felt like I was being riled against or ridiculed, or people felt like it was an extreme reaction to have maybe, or they felt like I should try other ways or do other things, I looked at what I'd already done and what I was feeling and what I was going through and what was unfair on me. And I just thought to myself, is this now a point of survival and well-being and needing to not feel this way anymore? Is it a need? Has it come to the point where this is really fucking detrimental to me? And if the answer to those questions is yes, I do not see why somebody's disapproval of my choice should be the thing that makes me turn back. I have to do what I have to do to keep myself safe. And for me personally, I always think when you've been as close to the line between life and death as I've been, you know, you don't mess around. I'm not messing around when it comes to my well-being, my safety, what I am ingesting into my life and into my psyche all the time. And I don't think that means that I'm an uncompromising person. I don't think it means that it's my way or the highway and I refuse anything else except what I want. I don't think that at all. But I think my boundaries are made of really strong steel now, partly because I know I've been to such dangerous places and I need to take care of myself. And if that's something that somebody else thinks that they should ridicule, that's fine. But for me, it's a point of survival. I had to start witnessing the messages that I was receiving, especially when I was growing up. And like I said, not all cycles that you're trying to break are connected to upbringing or connected to family. But this is one of the places that I first started with my own breaking of cycles. I looked at messages that I received growing up, things I learned as I was growing up, and I actually opened up a Word document in the end and I started writing a list of these messages. And they're different for everybody. Some people are told, as some people are taught, either explicitly or in more subtle, non-verbal ways all the time, that they need to be perfect or get good grades or behave in a certain way or believe in a certain God in order to be lovable, in order to be worthy of that, Some people absorbed a very distinct message that if they ask for help, they'll be ridiculed or help won't come and it will make them feel more lonely and afraid. So they have to always be self-sufficient. They cannot reach out to anybody. I think some people are very much given the message that they can't have their own point of view. There's no point in expressing their own point of view because they'll always be trodden over or told, no, that's not right. If you come from a family, for example, where there was just a really full-on domineering parent who always had their way and always had their say and trampled over everybody in every discussion, then you were brought up to absorb that message that it's better not to try expressing a differing point of view. It's easier life to just agree and suck everything up, repress everything, because there's no space for my voice, So depending on what's been happening with you in your life, either when you were younger or later on in adulthood, certain messages have been absorbed. I think starting that Word document where I actually wrote down the messages and then wrote down how I was receiving them. Were they explicitly stated over and over again? Were they values that were more sort of subtly brought into my upbringing through various things that were happening, so I could infer that that was a value or that I had to follow that? Was there a specific experience I had in my upbringing or my adulthood that made me, really turn on the head of a pin and be like, oh, that now means that I have to do this or I have to believe this or whatever? Because sometimes it can be one singular, very significant event. And I would write that down as well. And then I started to take inventory over the course of time. This was a long exercise, certainly not something that I did overnight. But I started to take stock of what I believe. So I'd look at the message and I'd think, okay, it's fair to say I absorbed that. It's fair to say that was a thing that happened. And when I looked at how I was absorbing it, where did that message come from? I would look at that and say, okay, that's fair. That definitely is the case. But then the next part of the work is always to say, well, what do I believe? Really, what do I believe? Where am I in this? Where is my identity? Where is my sense of self? Because it's okay if I believe something different. It's okay if this doesn't work for me. It's got to be okay. I've got to prop myself up now and know that it's okay for me to design life the way I want to or do things the way I need to. I would go back to that document with some regularity and just read through again because you forget. As I said, your life is just so full of different stuff happening and different things you have to respond to. It's perfectly okay to go back to the document and remind yourself. Another thing that I found really useful is looking at archetypes, looking at different roles that you would play in the family, in the workplace, in the friendship group or whatever, and really identifying which roles were sort of affixed to me in a way that I would describe as, shadowy. It was through doing my work with cycle breaking in relation to estrangement from my family that brought me to the realization that I had been both the golden child and the black sheep. And there was another family member of mine that I realized was, in contrast, the black sheep and the scapegoat, and we were pitted against each other in competition. And it was really interesting to see, like, okay, I always was thought of like this, and I felt like I had to perform in these ways because of that. But now I also see what other roles this other family member was being expected to play. It's like, wow, okay, so from their perspective, they obviously thought that I was lording it up over them, or I felt I was superior to them, but I never felt that in my own self. And even if I did, even if there were feelings of superiority, it's conditioning, it's training, it's the roles you're assigned, the way that you can tell is the most pleasing to the adults around you that you behave is the way you're going to behave, So looking at the archetypes, looking at the roles I was playing, and also the parts of me that wanted to come through and have more airtime but couldn't, that was very, very interesting to me. I'll leave a couple of videos down below that I've made about archetypes and how they've helped me and how I use them, if you would like to know more about that. But I think it's always really useful to look at, what we were being over and over again. Were you constantly connected to the victim archetype? Were you constantly expected to be the warrior? Were you the enabler? Were you the lost child? Were you cast as the villain of the piece and kind of played up to that, or felt like that's what you had to contend with because those are the sort of lines you were given, I just think it's interesting to look at, and I think we can be expected to play more than one role in any given structure, and we can become egoically attached, I think, to certain roles in any structure and feel like we have to play that role to the hilt because it describes who we are. And actually we're way more complicated than that, and it's okay to give our gaggle of selves room to just be. I gave myself a curriculum, a bunch of things that I knew that I wanted to learn about, and I wanted to read about, and I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to really sort of immerse myself in, and maybe just start conversations, with others about what they think about these subjects and what it's been like for them. I think I've always been a bit of a person to decide upon a curriculum for myself. I'm actually currently trying to decide what I will study for every month of 2022 because I want to be studying something different for every month. So I guess I'm a bit like that in my personality type. But I would have these certain things that I knew I wanted to explore more on, and I wanted to journal about, or I wanted to read up on or study or whatever. And that really gave me direction at the time where I was breaking down so many different things that weren't working for me, and I wasn't really sure what would be the next paradigm, because you can't always know that when you're cycle breaking. You can't always know what will come afterwards. So it was very stabilizing for me to have these things where I would be like, I'm going to read every book that this person wrote, or I'm going to read a lot of articles online about this thing. I'm going to figure out what are my principles around this, or what are the key things I need to know about it. And it would just be things about like family dynamics and boundary keeping and personal power, and just things that I knew I was like weaker on. Just sort of interesting psychological concepts or spiritual practices I thought I could use, and just giving myself that sense that I am on a journey of learning. And it's like I'm my own sort of school, and I've decided like, okay, these are my teachers, these are the things I need to be more aware of, and this is the content that I will sort of drink in to be able to do that. If this appeals to you, I would really strongly recommend building a curriculum, deciding for a while different things you will study or read about or get more up to date with or have a better understanding of. And it doesn't have to be an overflowing massive laundry list of stuff. I think it's important to just start with the with the time you have and the inclination that you have. Just go with one thing, maybe one thing at a time, if you will. It doesn't have to be like a curriculum with all these different courses on it per se, and you don't have to pay for anything. It doesn't have to be like an official course of study. You can just say to yourself, I'm gonna understand and learn more about whatever it is, or being authentic, or family structure, or if you know that a lot of the difficulties you've gone through were caused by substances, or caused by religious instruction, or caused by a difficult event like a bereavement or something like that, or an accident that caused you to go into very negative coping cycles, negative ways of dealing with things, then you can say, I'm going to learn more about that part of the origin story of this very toxic cycle. I'm going to go back to the beginning and understand it more, So I think that it can be definitely fruitful, and it can give you a sense of empowerment. One thing I will say that became very important to me with cycle breaking is I started to recognize that courage has just got to be part of the territory. And there was quite a few things when it came to cycle breaking that I waited and waited on, and I didn't implement because I was waiting until my fear subsided. And what I realized is that fear was my power horse. It was my stallion, and I had to ride it into the sun. You know, if you know, for example, that you want to ask your parent to stop doing something with your parent because you know it was damaging for you and you want them to stop it now, but you're holding on, you're biting your tongue, you're fearful of saying something, don't wait for that fear to subside. You've got to do it with the fear or not at all, I think. If you know that you have a cycle of like, you know, sort of convincing yourself out of making art and doing that scary thing artistically that you want to do, don't wait until the fear is gone for you to break the cycle. It's courage is the bread that comes with the soup, I think, in that regard. I think I meant fear is the bread that comes with the soup. So it's like basically the soup is the nourishing, beautiful thing you're going to do, and the fear seems like it should fuck off before you can eat the soup, but actually the fear is the bread. You know, I was going for that, but I think I got a little bit mixed up. Darlings, please leave for me down below any comments that you have about cycle breaking, your experiences with it, cycles that you're in the middle of breaking right now, or that you have broken, that you're proud of yourself for breaking those cycles. And come and follow me on social media. If you would like to join my Patreon to get access to the one card riff videos and the Discord privileges, etc., come and do that if you would like to. I'm going to leave a few relevant readings and sessions down below for my online store as well. I'm going to leave the inner child reading, the self-love reading, maybe I'll leave a few sessions or my deep self-knowledge reading, I don't know, maybe healing path. There's quite a few different options that you might want to look into as well and book some time with me into my schedule. Thank you so much for watching this video and for exploring with me some of the ways in which I managed to do this thing. And you know, it is the progress is not always easy, and it's not always quick and simple. You have to be there for yourself. You have to keep reminding yourself of what it is that you're doing, and know that it's not supposed to be a straight line. It's not supposed to look perfect, and it's supposed to be complicated. And you know, you're building something new. And yeah, I want to send extra love and care and thanks to first generation cycle breakers, or you know, the first whistleblower in the company, or whatever it is, like the people that are just doing it from scratch, that are really feeling like you know, they're the first person to say something, to call something out, to do something differently. And it's hard because you don't know if you'll be supported, and you don't feel like you've really got that person who can encourage you, who is kind of like your master in a way. And don't forget, even if you don't feel like you have any personal masters in that regard in your situation, we can always find very, very epic cycle breakers through the halls of history that we can count on to bring into our heart at the moment where we really need to make that bold decision, and we need to do the thing we know we need to do. Darlings, thank you so much for joining me for this video. Much love and blessed be. Mwah.